that are bitter, you guys could add in if you guys want.
Left.
Hey gang, starting here. What's up, everyone? What do you say we do a little drawing? Because I beat Stutterblade, I don't actually have another game ready to go. I mean, I could do Path of Exile too, but like, one, it still wasn't bringing in numbers, and two, it was fucking boring. As a game, like I just didn't like it. So, I've been listening to Storm of Steel, the audiobook, and I believe that it speaks uh more completely than anything else that I can even imagine in terms of what the war was actually like. There's a lot of conventions about how war, books and narratives are supposed to go that it breaks. And it defies that, and I like that. Like it says more truly how war actually is than anything else I've seen. But before we do that, I'm gonna turn on the AC. It's hot. But anyway, thank you guys for joining me. 1 second. That's better. I hope the gain doesn't pick up the AC and blast you guys out. I'm sorry if it does. One thing about moving, I cannot wait to move so I can bigger desk. You don't know how cramped this setup I've got going on right now is. Because I'm drawing, I'm just gonna, and I don't have the webcam pointed at me, and it's awkward because of my setup, which is very cramped. We're just gonna skip the Doge avatar. Anyway, let's get back to Storm of Steel.
Splinter in the thigh, while the other three were torn apart by the shell that flew through the basement wall and blew up in the far corner. Following this account, I lit a cigar and entered the smoky room, in the middle of which was piled almost to the ceiling a bolus of straw sacks, smashed bedsteads, and other furniture.
Just
After we had set down
clean it up, okay.
candles in niches in the wall, we set about the sorry task. We seized hold of the limbs sticking out from the wreckage and pulled out the corpses. One man had lost his head, and the end of his torso was like a great sponge of blood. Splintered bones stuck out of the arm stump of the second, and his uniform was drenched with blood from a great wound in his chest. The intestines of the third were spilling out of his opened belly. As we pulled him out, a splintered piece of board caught in the wound with a hideous noise. One orderly passed a remark and was rebuked by Niga with the words, "Shut up, man. You don't waste words over something like this." I made an inventory of their personal belongings. It was a ghastly job. The candles flickered reddishly in the dusty air, while the men handed me wallets and rings and watches as if we were a bunch of gangsters. Fine yellow brick dust had settled on the dead men's faces and gave them the rigid appearance of waxen effigies. We draped blankets over them and hurried out of the basement, having first wrapped the wounded man in a tarpaulin. With the stoical advice, "Better grit your teeth, comrade," we dragged him through wild shrapnel fire to the dressing station. Once back in my lodging, I first of all took some cherry brandy to recover. Before long, the firing got worse again, and we hurriedly gathered in the shelter, having just been given a vivid demonstration of the effects of artillery on cellars. At precisely 14 minutes past 5, the bombardment, in the space of a few seconds, reached an extraordinary pitch. Our intelligence service had been dead right. The shelter was shaking and trembling like a ship in a storm, while all around came the sounds of crashing walls and the splintering of the houses nearby, collapsing. At 7 o'clock, I received a light signal addressed to
I'm not
the
entirely
second
sure what I even want to draw. What do you guys think?
brigade
What do you want to see?
requires immediate report on the situation.
I could draw a person,
An hour later,
or I
a
could
tired runner came
just
back with the
wing
news.
it.
Enemy occupying Arlu and Arlu Park. 8th Company ordered to counterattack. No news as yet. Rochol, Captain. That was the single, albeit crucial, item of news that I was able to pass on with my big staff in the course of my 3-week stay in Fresnoy. Now, when my being there was of the utmost value, the artillery had put almost all my means of communication out of commission. I myself was caught like a rat in a trap The setting up of this intelligence post had proved mistaken. It was a case of over-centralization. This surprising bit of news now explained to me why rifle bullets had been rattling against the walls for some time and from
So
fairly
let me
close.
find it.
No sooner had we grasped the extent of the regiment's losses than the bombardment recommenced with full power. Nig was the last man standing on the shelter stairs when a thunderous crash told us that the British had at last managed to score a direct hit on our cellar. The stolid Nig caught a lump of rock on the back, but was otherwise unhurt. Above, everything was in pieces. Daylight reached us through a couple of bicycles that had been crushed into the shelter entrance. We retreated to the bottom step, while the continuing thud and rattle of masonry reminded us of the uncertainty even of this refuge of ours. As if by a miracle, the telephone was still working. I informed the divisional chief of intelligence of our situation and was given orders to
I mean, Luffy turned into a wax dolls. I'm not very good, but here, I'll give it a try. Why not? 1 second, let me open up that link.
Which was at least still intact. Even though I didn't stint with threats and orders, the rather
let me see.
telephonists took such a long time to
1 second.
the relative protection of the shelter and exposed themselves to direct fire that entrance was hit by a heavy shell and collapsed with a great crash. It was fortunate that no one was hit. Only our little dog set up a howl and was never seen again. Now we had to heave aside the bicycles that were blocking the cellar exit, creep on all fours over the debris, and slip through a crack in the wall into the open. Without stopping to take in the unbelievable change that had come over the place, we headed out of the village as fast as we could. No sooner had the last man of us got past the front gate than the house took one more huge hit, and that was the coup de grace. The terrain between the edge of the village and the dressing station was
Let's see.
a total artillery barrage.
Let's see. Luffy turned into wax dolls. Luffy is a little risque. Let me start with a 1 though. Okay, let me save this one as a reference picture. 1 second. I will see what I can do with the one that's not the one in the black t-shirt. I'll start with that one. Add that to the rafts list. Like I said, I'm not actually very good, so okay, you'll have to bear with me here. Let me turn the storm of steel back on while I work.
Light and heavy shells with impact, fire and time delay fuses, duds, empty cases and shrapnels all participated in a kind of madness that was too much for our eyes and ears. In amongst it all, going either side of the witch's cauldron of the village, support troops were advancing. Fresnoy was one towering fountain of earth after another. Each second seemed to want to outdo the last. As if by some magical power, one house after another subsided into the earth. Walls broke, gables fell, and bare sets of beams and joists were sent flying through the air, cutting down the roofs of other houses. Clouds of splinters danced over whitish wraiths of steam. Eyes and ears were utterly compelled by this maelstrom of devastation. We spent the next 2 days in the dressing station dugout, in conditions of great overcrowding, because in addition to my men, it housed the staffs of 2 battalions, 2 relief detachments, and the inevitable odds and sods. The coming and going...
Let me look up what a wax doll actually looks like.
The continual buzz of activity, as around a beehive, of course didn't go unnoticed by our opponents. Soon, wickedly aimed shells landed at 1-minute intervals on the footpaths outside, and the calls for the ambulancemen,
Oh boy, that's gonna be a challenge. Like, I'll try my best, but like I'm gonna struggle with that one.
Which I had left next to the entrance. They were comprehensively remodeled and cast to the four winds. At the entrance, stiff and silent, rolled in a tarpaulin, his big horn rims still on his face, lay Lieutenant Lemiere, the commander of the 8th Company, who had been brought here by his men. He had received a shot in the mouth. His younger brother was to fall only a few months later, hit in the same way. On 30 April, my successor took over from me with the Relief Regiment, the 25th, and we moved to Fleur, the rendezvous for the 1st Battalion. Leaving the heavily shelled lime-kiln Chez Bontemps,
Take a look at a wax doll here as a ref image.
across the fields to Beaumont in the balmy afternoon. Our eyes once more appreciated the beauty of the earth, relieved to have escaped the unbearable constriction of the shelter hole, and our lungs drew in the intoxicating spring air. With the rumble of guns behind us, we were able to say with the poet, "A day that God, the maker of the world,
Okay, you want that pose?
made
Let me
us
see.
things than fighting." In Fleurs, I found my designated quarters had been occupied by several staff sergeant majors, who, claiming they had to guard the room on behalf of a certain Baron von X, refused to make room, but hadn't reckoned on the short temper of an irritated and tired frontline officer. I had my men knock the door down, and following a short scuffle in front of the peacetime
Your expectations aren't too high, because, like, this is hard. Like, I'm not very good.
The gentleman, or gentleman's gentleman.
I'll give it a try, but yeah, no promises.
Nigger was sufficiently gracious to throw their boots out after them. After this successful attack, I climbed into my nicely warmed-up bed, offering half of it to my friend Caius, who was still wandering around looking for an abode. The sleep in this long-missed fixture did
Okay, let me
following morning
try my best here.
Fully refreshed. Since the 1st Battalion had not lost many men during the recent
And
fight,
get a wax
the
doll
mood was
here.
pretty cheerful, as we
Do you want like a wax doll dress? Is that what you want? Let me like. See if I can find a wax doll here. Is it the gray one? Not the doll. Oh, no, I'm sorry, I don't know. You say me and Luffy, like, I don't understand what that means. I'm sorry. I have, let's see, where's... So you want her drawn as a white doll like that? Like, uh... Like, I'm sorry, I'm not entirely tracking here. So do you want her wearing, like, that outfit, though, but with white skin in that pose?
Our destination was the village of Seran, where we were to rest and recuperate for a few days. We had a friendly welcome and good accommodation from the villagers, and already on our first evening the happy sounds of reunited comrades could be heard from many of the dwellings. Such libations after a successfully endured engagement are among the fondest memories an old warrior may have. Even if 10 out of 12 men had fallen, the two survivors would surely meet over a glass on their first evening off and drink a silent toast to their comrades and jestingly talk over their shared experiences. There was in these men a quality that both emphasized the savagery of war and transfigured it at the same time. An objective relish for danger, the chevaleresque urge to prevail in battle. Over 4 years, the fire smelted an ever purer, ever bolder warriorhood. The next morning, Niga appeared and read out some orders, from which I understood that I was to take over the command of the 4th Company at around noon. This was the company in which the Lower Saxon poet Hermann Lons fell in the autumn of 1914 outside Reims, a volunteer at the age of almost 50. Against Indian opposition. The 6th of May 1917 already found us back on the march, heading once more for the familiar destination of Brancourt, and on the following day we moved, via Montbretagne, Ramicourt and Joncourt, to the Siegfried line that we had left only a month before. The first evening was stormy. Heavy rain clattered down on the already flooded terrain. Soon, though, a succession of fine, warm days reconciled us to our new place. I enjoyed the splendid landscape, untroubled by the white balls of shrapnel and the jumping cones of shells, in fact barely noticing them. Each spring marked the beginning of a new year's fighting. Intimations of a big offensive were as much part of the season as primroses and pussy willows. Our sector was a semicircular bulge in front of the St. Quentin Canal. At our rear we had the famous Siegfried line. I confess I am at a loss to understand why we had to take our place in these tight, undeveloped limestone trenches when we had that enormously strong bulwark just behind us. The front line wound its way through meadowland shaded by little clumps of trees, wearing the fresh green of early spring. It was possible to walk safely in front of and behind the trenches, as many advanced positions secured the line. These posts were a thorn in the enemy's side, and some weeks not a night would pass without an attempt to remove the sentries, either by guile or by brute force. But our first period in position passed pleasantly quietly. The weather was so beautiful that we spent the nights lying on the grass. On 14th May, we were relieved by the 8th Company and moved, the fires of St. Quentin on our right, to our resting place, Montbretagne, a large village that had as yet taken little harm from the war and afforded very agreeable accommodation. On the 20th, as the reserve company, we occupied the Siegfried line. It was summer holidays. We spent the days sitting in little summer huts erected on the slopes or swimming and rowing on the canal. I spent the time lying stretched out on the grass, reading the whole of Ariosto to my great enjoyment. These idyllic positions have the one drawback that one's superior officers like to visit them, which is a great dampener to the coziness of trench life. That said, my left flank, posted against the already nibbled-at village of Bellenglise, had no shortage of fire to complain of. On the very first day, one man was hit by a shrapnel in the right buttock. On hearing the news, I rushed to the scene of the misfortune, and there he was, happily sitting up on his left, waiting for the ambulance men to arrive, drinking coffee and munching on a vast slice of bread and jam. On 25th May, we relieved the 12th Company at Riqueval Ferme. This farm, formerly a great landed estate, served each of the 4 companies in the position alternately as base. From there, units went out to man 3 machine gun nests positioned in the hinterland. These diagonally positioned support points, covering each other like chess pieces, represented the first attempts in this war at a more supple, variable form of defense. The farm was a mile at the most behind the front line. Even so, its various buildings dotted about in a rather overgrown park were still completely unscathed. It was also densely populated. Dugouts had yet to be created. The blooming hawthorn avenues in the park and the attractive surroundings gave our existence here an intimation of the leisurely country idyll that the French are so expert at creating. And that so close to the front. A pair of swallows had made their nest in my bedroom and were busy from very early in the morning with the noisy feeding of their insatiable young. In the evenings, I took a stick out of the corner and strolled along narrow footpaths that went winding through the hilly landscape. The neglected fields were full of flowers, and the smell grew headier and wilder by the day. Occasional trees stood beside the paths, under which a farm worker might have taken his ease in peacetime, bearing white or pink or deep red blossoms, magical apparitions in the solitude. Nature seemed to be pleasantly intact, and yet the war had given it a suggestion of heroism and melancholy. Its almost excessive blooming was even more radiant and narcotic than usual.
You want her wearing the
It's
black
easier
shirt
to
and
be
jeans, though?
against such a setting than
Or
in
do you want her in,
and
like, a
beautiful
dress?
scenery. The simple soul is convinced here that his life is deeply embedded in nature, and that his death is no end. On 30 May, this idyll was over for me, because that was the day Lieutenant Vogely was released from hospital and resumed command of the 4th Company. I returned to my old second on the front line. 2 platoons manned our sector from the Roman road to the so-called artillery trench. A third was at company headquarters some 200 yards back behind a little slope. There, Kios and I shared a tiny plank lean-to together, trusting to the incompetence of the British artillery. One side was built into the downhill slope, the direction the shells would be coming from, while the other 3 offered their flanks to the enemy. Every day, as the morning greetings were wafted up to us, one might have heard a conversation between the occupants of the top and bottom bunks that went roughly like this.
Let me take a look.
Are you awake? I think they're shooting. Oh, I don't want to get up yet. I'm sure they'll be finished soon. A quarter of an hour later. I say, Oscar. They seem to be going on forever today. I thought I heard a shrapnel ball come flying through the wall just now. I think we'd better get up after all. The artillery.
Okay, yeah, so you want... Yeah. Me and Luffy. Which one is you and which one is Luffy? Okay, I have...
The British usually were too.
Like, I have this girl in the black shirt and jeans, but I don't know who that is, and I don't know what the other person. So you want the light? Probably too light. I don't want to get in trouble with Twitch, but let me see if I can add whoever this... whoever this girl is. I don't know who she is, but yeah, if I'm not entirely sure who Luffy is, but I'll try to just one for one copy her skin tone. Okay, it's a lot better than that. Here, let me ask. Yep, yeah. Okay, let's see here. I'm sorry, if Luffy is a character, like I don't actually know who that is. No blank, sorry. But I will do my best, even though I've never actually done anything like this before, so... Yeah, like I usually rely a lot on... just kind of tracing and recreating existing pictures for this. And drawing from scratch is hard. I'm not very good. There's only one way to learn. So you will be the guinea pig for drawing wax dolls. Although providing the poses just helps a lot. That was very useful. Okay. Yeah. So, could you tell me which one is Luffy then? Can you send the Luffy picture? Like I have the one on the bottom, which is the one with the girl pulling her teeth. Is that Luffy? Like, let me take a look at her on the website again. Okay, no, that's Zoro. Okay, so don't quite know who. Okay, and Luffy is the girl in the black shirt. Okay, can you post Luffy's link again, please? I missed what Luffy. Hi, Kitty. I have a cat coming to join me. Stay off the screen, Kitty. I'm sorry. I'm not understanding who Luffy is. Like I don't know who Luffy is. I know that you're the one with the black shirt. I don't know who Luffy is. Sorry, like I don't know. Like your phrasing implies there's two people, but I don't know who the second person is. So I'm gonna just start with this one for now. It's just, obviously you have to have at least one of them. Okay, so the boy. All right, now I understand. So, okay, that's luck. Yeah. All right. This is gonna be hard. I'll do my best. So we've got you, this. Okay, so do you want to be the one looking over the shoulder, or is that Luffy? I'm gonna leave the storm of steel off for now so I can focus. Because suddenly I have to concentrate. It's hard. Second, sorry. quick peek of that Zero picture is, yeah, a little dubious for Twitch, so looking at it over here. Okay, so let's see. I think I remember dolls having more like sharper lines. Wax dollified. Could have made this a separate layer. Whoops. Yeah, I goofed by not making the lines a separate layer. Bet. Using this Zora as the template. Okay, let's see. I guess we'll start. Do you want them just like that? Just uh, obviously not completely nude, but like without the clothing, without the outfit. Okay. And do you want them to have the hair, or like a wig looking hair, or do you want them to be just bald, like a mannequin style? Probably want the hair. Let's go with Skipper. Come on, oh, my mouse. Kitty. All right. And detail. Here's a little too high. Skipper, man, this cat not seem to understand. Yeah, Skipper can mess up my drawing if you see people like that. Yes, I don't think that will. Have to work on the tips a little. Way. Definitely gonna have to come back to the bangs, like whatever that is that's sticking forward. Right now she's got a bit of a 5 head. It's down past her neckline. The neckline, oh, it's low. You want her with, let's see. No, you probably want her without the hat then. It's the hairband though. Base. That's gonna be couch. That's right there. Eyes. And you wanted eyes with uh, without pupils. Okay. Okay, this is gonna be hard. The eyebrows, let's see. Yeah, so she's a doll. Would you even have eyebrows, or would they just be like painted on? Probably just painted on. I think here. Let's see. How a doll would have their face constructed. Whoa, look, it's cat. Come on. What did he do? Holy shit. A little bit of a kitty issue for a second there. Kitty on the keyboard. Fucking that right there, man. Chill with that shit, yeah. I love this kitty, but sometimes I misunderstand that. The desk is not big enough for him to do everything. Alright, let's see here. One second, I need to get the restroom. Let's see here. Boop. Okay, back to Princess and Yuffie. Or Luffy. Look at some more wax dolls real quick. I don't think they emphasize the lines that I'm emphasizing. Like I keep thinking of the dolls from like FF14 where they have these really pronounced connectors. Take a look. I'll just use the one you sent me as the guide, so I will. They think de-emphasize the lines. Soften this up a bit. Focus on this. Brush. Okay. Back to the Storm of Steel real quick now that I have some idea of what I'm trying to draw.
Sit down at the ridiculously small table, drink our sour, stewed coffee, and light a morning cigar. In the afternoons, we mocked the British gunners by lying out on a tarpaulin and doing some sunbathing. In other respects, too, our shack was an entertaining place to be. As we lay idly on our wire-sprung beds, enormous earthworms would come nosing out of the earthen wall. If we interfered with them, they would show a surprising turn of speed, disappearing back into their holes. A gloomy mole occasionally came snuffling out of his warren. His appearances always greatly enlivened our siesta time. On 12th June, I was told to take a troop of 20 men and invest an outpost on the company front. It was late when we left the trench and headed along a footpath winding through the hilly countryside into the pleasant evening. Dusk was so far advanced that the poppies in the abandoned fields seemed to merge with the bright green grass. In the declining light, I saw more and more of my favorite color, that red which shades into black that is at once somber and stimulating. Whatever thoughts we might have had, we kept to ourselves as we walked silently over the flowery slopes with our rifles over our shoulders, and 20 minutes later we had reached our destination. In whispers the post was taken over, a guard was mounted, and then the men who had been relieved slipped off into the dark. The outpost leaned against a steep little slope with a line of hurriedly dug foxholes. Behind it, 100 yards or so back, a small tangle of woodland merged with the night. In front and to the right rose two hills across which ran the British lines. One of them was crested by the ruins of the auspiciously named Ascension Farm. A little path led between the hills in the general direction of the enemy. That was where, while inspecting my sentries, I ran into Sergeant Major Hackman and a few men from the 7th. They were just about to go out on patrol. Even though I wasn't supposed to leave the outpost, I decided to join them for the hell of it. Adopting a type of movement of my own devising, of which more later, we had crossed two entanglements and crested the hill, strangely without encountering any sentries, when we heard the sounds of the British digging to the right and left of us. Later on, I realized that the enemy must have withdrawn his sentries to have them out of the way for the ambush I will go on to describe. The movement that I alluded to a moment ago consisted in letting members of a patrol go forward one at a time when there was a chance that we might encounter the enemy at any moment. So there was never more than one man in front, taking it in turn to risk being the one shot by a hidden sentry, while the others were all at his back, ready to lend support at a moment's notice. I took my turn with the rest, even though my presence with the rest of the patrol might have mattered more, but there is more to war than such tactical considerations. We crawled around several digging parties, as there were unfortunately large wire obstacles between them and ourselves. After quickly rejecting the rather eccentric Sergeant Major's suggestion that he might pretend to be a deserter and keep the enemy distracted until we had gone around the first enemy sentries, we crept back to the outpost. There is something stimulating about such excursions. The heart beats a little faster, and one is bombarded by fresh ideas. I resolved to dream away the mild night, and rigged up a nest for myself in the tall grass on the slope, lining it with my coat. Then I lit my pipe as discreetly as I could, and drifted off on the wings of my imagination. In the middle of my pipe dreams, I was startled by a distinct rustling coming from the woods and the meadow. In the presence of the enemy, one's senses are always on the qui-vive, and it's a strange thing that one can feel sure, even on the basis of rather ordinary sounds. This is it. Straight away, the nearest sentry came rushing up to me. "Lieutenant, sir, there are 70 British soldiers advancing on the edge of the wood." Though somewhat surprised at such a precise count, I hid in the tall grass on the slope, along with 4 riflemen, to wait and see what happened next. A few seconds later, I saw a group of men flitting across the meadow. As my men leveled their rifles at them, I called down a soft, "Who goes there?" It was NCO Tylen Girders, an experienced warrior from the 2nd, collecting up his excited unit. The other units quickly arrived. I had them form into a line stretching from the slope to the wood. A minute later, they were standing ready with fixed bayonets. It couldn't hurt to check the alignment. In such situations, you can't be too pedantic. As I was upbraiding a man who was standing a little back, he replied, "I'm a stretcher bearer, sir." He had his own rules to follow. Relieved, I ordered the men to advance. As we strode across the strip of meadow, a hail of shrapnel flew over our heads. The enemy was laying down a dense fire in an attempt to disrupt our communications. Involuntarily, we slipped into a jog trot to reach
Fix his hair a little bit.
in front of us. Suddenly, a dark form arose out of the grass. I tore off a hand grenade and hurled it in the direction of the figure with a shout. To my consternation, I saw by the flash of the explosion that it was Tylen Girders, who, unnoticed by me, had somehow run on ahead and tripped over a wire. Fortunately, he was unhurt. Simultaneously, we heard the sharper reports of British grenades, and the shrapnel fire became unpleasantly concentrated. Our line melted away in the direction of the steep slope, which was experiencing heavy fire, while Tylen Girders and I and 3 men stayed put. Suddenly one of them jogged me. "Look, the British!" Like a vision in a dream, the sight, lit only by falling sparks, of a double line of kneeling figures at the instant in which they rose to advance, etched itself into my eye. I could clearly make out the figure of an officer on the right of the line, giving the command to advance. Friend and foe were paralyzed by this sudden, unexpected meeting. Then we turned to flee. The only thing we could do. The enemy, it seemed, still too paralyzed to fire at us. We leaped up and ran towards the slope. Even though I tripped over a wire laid treacherously in the tall grass and flew head over heels, I made it safely and ordered my excited troops into a compressed line. Our situation was now such that we were sitting under the bowl of fire, as under a tightly woven basket. What appeared to have happened was that in our advance we had disturbed the enemy's flanking maneuver. We were at the foot of the slope on a somewhat worn path. The wheel ruts were enough to afford us some minimal protection against their rifles, because one's instinctive response to danger is to press oneself as close as possible to Mother Earth. We kept our guns pointed at the wood, which meant that the British lines were behind us. This one circumstance unsettled me more than anything that might be going on in the wood. So, during the ensuing action, I took care to send occasional lookouts up the slope. Suddenly, the shelling ceased. We needed to steel ourselves for an attack. No sooner had our ears grown used to the surprising silence than sounds of crackling and rustling were heard coming from the wood. "Halt! Who goes there? Password!" We must have shouted for about 5 minutes, including the old first...
I'm just struggling with this hair. Like, hair is hard.
An expression for beer and a short familiar to all Hanoverians, but all we got back was a muddle of voices. Finally, I decided to give the order to shoot, even though there were some of us who felt certain they had heard some words of German. My 20 rifles discharged their bullets into the wood, bolts rattled, and soon we heard the wailing of wounded from the brush. I had an uneasy feeling, because I thought it was within the bounds of possibility that we were firing at a detachment sent to help us. I was relieved, therefore, to see little yellow tongues of flame flash back, although they soon stopped. One man was hit in the shoulder, and the stretcher-bearer tended to him. "Hold your fire." Slowly the order took effect, and the shooting stopped. The tension in any case had been broken by our taking some action. Further calls for the password. I scraped together what little English I had, and shouted a few, I hoped, persuasive words of encouragement. "Come here, you are prisoners, hands up." Thereupon more confused shouting, which sounded to us like the German word Reich, Reich, revenge, revenge. A single man emerged from the edge of the wood and came towards us. One of the men made the mistake of shouting "password" to him, causing him to stop irresolutely and turn back, obviously a scout. "Shoot him down!" A volley of a dozen shots. The figure subsided into the tall grass. The little episode filled us with satisfaction. From the edge of the wood once more there was the strange jabbering. It sounded as though the attackers were encouraging one another to advance against mysterious defenders. We stared intently at the dark line of wood. It began to get light, and a thin morning fog rose off the meadow. Then we saw something that was a rarity in this war of long-range weapons. Out of the dark brush, a line of figures emerged and stepped onto the open meadow. 5, 10, 15, a whole line. Trembling fingers took off safety catches. A distance of 50 yards, 30, 15. Fire. The rifles barked for several minutes. Sparks flew as spurts of lead struck weapons and steel helmets. Suddenly a shout, "Watch out, left!" A mob of attackers was running towards us from the left, headed by an enormous figure with an outstretched revolver and swinging a white club. "Left section! Left front!" The men spun round and welcomed the new arrivals in a standing posture. A few of the enemy, among them their leader, collapsed under the hurriedly fired-off shots. The others vanished as quickly as they had appeared. Now was our moment to charge. With fixed bayonets and loud hurrahs, we surged into the little wood. Hand grenades flew into the tangled undergrowth, and in no time at all we were back in control of our outpost, although admittedly without having come to grips with our elusive foe. We assembled in an adjacent cornfield and gazed at each other's pale and exhausted faces. The sun had risen radiantly. A lark was ascending, getting on our wicks with its trilling. It was all unreal after that feverishly intent night. While we handed round our canteens and lit cigarettes, we heard the enemy leaving along the path, with a few loudly lamenting wounded in tow. We even caught a glimpse of them, but not long enough to chase after and finish them off. I went off to survey the battlefield. From the meadow arose exotic calls and cries for help. The voices were like the noise that frogs make in the grass after a rainstorm. In the tall grass, we discovered a line of dead and 3 wounded who threw themselves at our feet and begged us for mercy. They seemed to be convinced that we would massacre them. In answer to my question, Quelle nation? One replied, Pauvre Rajput. So these were Indians we had confronted, who had traveled thousands of miles across the sea, only to give themselves a bloody nose on this god-forsaken piece of earth against the Hanoverian rifles. They were delicate, and in a bad way. At such short range, an infantry bullet has an explosive effect. Some of them had been hit a second time as they lay there, and in such a way that the bullets had passed longitudinally down the length of their bodies. All of them had been hit twice, and a few more than that. We picked them up and dragged them towards our lines. Since they were screaming like banshees, my men tried to hold their mouths shut and brandish their fists at them, which terrified them still more. One died on the way, but he was still taken along, because there was a reward for every prisoner taken, whether alive or dead. The other 2 tried to ingratiate themselves with us by calling out repeatedly, Anglais pas bon. Why these people spoke French I couldn't quite understand the whole scene. The mixture of the prisoners' laments and our jubilation had something primordial about it. This wasn't war. It was ancient history. Returned to the line, we were received in triumph by the company, who had heard the sounds of fighting and had been pegged back by a heavy artillery barrage, and our captives were much gawped at. Here, I was able to set the minds of our captives at rest. They seemed to have been told the direst things about us. They thawed a little and told me their names. One of them was Amar Singh. Their outfit was the 1st Haryana Lancers, a good regiment, I'm told. Then I retired with Kius, who took half a dozen photographs, to our hut, and had him treat me to celebratory fried eggs. Our little skirmish was mentioned in the divisional orders for the day. With only 20 men...
Did you want the hair white too?
...several times larger, and attacking us from more than
Just assumed you wanted it
and in spite of the fact that we had orders to
wig style,
we were outnumbered. It was
properly colored.
precisely an engagement like this that I'd been dreaming of during the long years of positional warfare. It turned out, by the way, that we lost a man in addition to the one who was wounded, and that in mysterious circumstances. The fellow in question was barely fit for active service any longer, because an earlier wound had left him morbidly fearful. We only noticed he was missing the next day. I assumed that in a fit of panic he ran off into one of the cornfields, and there met his end. The following evening,
Skipper, I love you. Relax, Skipper Dipper. What's wrong with Kitty?
Dug himself in there by now.
This
I
cat.
chopped wood in a pincer movement. I led one detachment, Kios the other. Here, for the first time, I adopted a particular mode of approaching a dangerous site, which consisted of having one man after another going around it. If the place was in fact occupied, a simple left or rightward movement created a possibility for flanking fire. After the war, I included this maneuver in the infantry engagement manual under the name of flanking file. The 2 detachments met up without incident at the slope. Aside from the fact that Kius barely missed shooting me as he cocked his pistol, there was no sign of the enemy. It was only on the path between the 2 hills that I had reconnoitred with Sergeant Major Hackman that a sentry challenged us, fired a flare and some live rounds. We made a note of the noisy young man for another time. In the place where the night before we had beaten back the flank attack, we found 3 bodies. They were 2 Indians and a white officer with 2 gold stars on his shoulder straps, a 1st lieutenant. He had been shot in the eye. The bullet had exited through his temple and shattered the rim of his steel helmet. which I kept as a souvenir. In his right hand he still held the club, reddened with his own blood, and in his left a heavy Colt revolver, whose magazine had only 2 bullets left in it. He had evidently had serious intentions towards us.
1 second. This
In the
cat
course of the
is...
following days, more bodies were discovered in the undergrowth.
Kitty whining at me to feed him, so I'll be right back. You hungry? Okay. Kitties are now fed. Alright.
Evidence of the attackers' heavy losses, which added to the gloomy atmosphere that prevailed there. As I was making my way through a thicket once, on my own, I was
Okay.
dismayed by a quiet hissing and burbling sound. I stepped closer and encountered two bodies, which the heat had awakened to a ghostly type of life. The night was silent and humid. I stopped a long time before the eerie scene. On the 18th of June, the outpost was again attacked. On this occasion, things didn't go so well for us. Panic developed. The men fled in all directions and couldn't be brought together again. In the confusion, one of them, Corporal Erdalt, ran straight towards the slope, tumbled down it, and found himself in the midst of a group of lurking Indians. He flung hand grenades around, but was seized by the collar by an Indian officer and hit in the face with a wire whip. Then his watch was taken off him. He was kicked and punched to make him march, but he successfully escaped when the Indians once lay down to avoid some machine gun fire. After wandering around for a long time behind the enemy lines, he came back with nothing worse than a few bloody welts across his face. On the evening of June 19th, I set off with little Schultz, 10 men and a light machine gun on a patrol from the now distinctly morbid-feeling place, to pay a call on the sentry on the path who had reacted so noisily to our presence there a few days ago. Schultz and his men went right, and I went left to meet at the path, promising to come to one another's aid if there was any trouble. We worked our way forward on our bellies through the grass and furze, stopping to listen every so often. Suddenly, we heard the sharp rattle of a rifle bolt. We lay completely riveted to the ground. Anyone who's been on a patrol will be familiar with the rapid succession of disagreeable feelings that flooded us in the next few seconds. You've at least temporarily lost the freedom of action, and you have to wait and see what the enemy will do. A shot rang out through the oppressive silence.
Alright, how do you feel so far? Like I said, like I'm very new to this. This is by far the most ambitious thing I've just tried in terms of trying to freak at it rather than.
Only a few feet away. I saw that we had fallen into a trap and ordered retreat. We leaped up and ran back like crazy, while I saw that rifle fire had engaged my left-hand troop as well. In the middle of all this clatter, I gave up all hope of a safe return. Every moment I was expecting to be hit. Death was at our heels. From the left, we were attacked with shrill hurrahs. Little Schultz admitted to me later he'd had a vision of a long, tall Indian behind him with a knife, reaching out to grab him by the scruff of the neck. Once I fell and brought down Corporal Tellengirders.
Alright, kitties, huh? You just had some food.
Helmet, pistol, and hand grenades. On. At last, we reached the protective slope and charged down it. Little Schultz and his people came round the corner at about the same time. He reported to me breathlessly that at least he'd given the cheeky sentry a stiff rebuke in the form of a few hand grenades. A man was dragged in who had been shot in both legs. All the others were unhurt. The worst thing was that the man who'd been carrying the machine gun, a recruit, had fallen over the wounded man and had left the machine gun behind. While we were still arguing the toss and planning a follow-up expedition, an artillery bombardment began that reminded me of the one we'd had on the 12th, down to the hopeless confusion it started. I found myself with no weapon, alone on the slope with the wounded man, who dragged himself forward on both hands, creeping up to me and wailed, "Please, Lieutenant, sir, don't leave me." I had to, though, to go and organize our defenses. The wounded man was at least taken in later the same night.
If I can.
We occupied a row of shallow firing positions on the edge of the wood, feeling heartily relieved to see daybreak without further incident. The following evening found us in the same place, with the aim of getting our machine gun back. But suspicious noises we heard as we approached suggested there was once again a welcoming committee waiting for us, and we turned back. We were therefore ordered to get the gun back.
Why can I not moderate my chat?
At 12 o'clock the next night, following 3 minutes preliminary bombardment, we were to attack the enemy sentries and look for our gun.
For some reason I can't seem to moderate this.
Would make difficulties for us, but I
That's
put on a
strange.
brave face and fired some ranging shots with some of the batteries myself in the afternoon. At 11 o'clock, therefore, my companion
ban them later.
Schultz and I found ourselves back at that eerie spot where we had already had so many adventures and scrapes. The smell of decomposition in the humid air was too much. We had brought a few sacks of quicklime with us, and now sprinkled that on the bodies. The white stains loomed like shrouds out of the blackness. Tonight's other undertaking began with our own machine gun bullets whistling round our legs and smacking into the slope. I had a furious argument with Schultz, who had given the machine gunners their range. We made it up again, though, when Schultz discovered me behind a bush with a bottle of Burgundy, which I had brought along to strengthen me for the dubious venture. At the agreed time, the first shell went up. It landed fully 50 yards behind us. Before we could wonder at this peculiar gunnery, a second had come down right next to us on the slope and dusted us with earth. This time I wasn't even allowed to curse, as the artillery had been my responsibility. After this somewhat discouraging overture, we went ahead, more for the sake of honor and duty than with any particular hope of success. We were lucky the sentries seemed to have quit their posts. Otherwise, we should have been accorded a rough welcome this time too. Unfortunately, we didn't manage to find the machine gun. Admittedly, we didn't spend that much time looking for it either.
I mean, come on.
Probably long since safe in British hands. On the way back, Schultz and I gave each other a piece of our minds. I over his instructions to the machine gunners, he over the artillery targeting. And yet I had done my work so scrupulously, I couldn't understand what had gone wrong. It wasn't till later that I learned that guns always shoot short at night, and that I should therefore have added another 100 yards to the range. Then we discussed the most important aspect of the affair, the report. We wrote it in such a way that we were both satisfied. As we were relieved the next day by troops from another division, there was no more argy-bargy. We were returned for the time being to Montbrahane, and marched from there to Cambrai, where we spent almost the entire month of July. The outpost was finally lost the night after our departure. Langemarck. Cambrai is a sleepy little town in the Artois, with a name full of historical associations. Its narrow old streets wind their way round an imposing town hall, ancient town gates, and many churches where the great Archbishop Fénelon once preached his sermons. Hefty towers rise out of a mass of pointed gables. Wide avenues lead to the well-kept town park, which is graced by a memorial to the aviator Blériot. The inhabitants are quiet, friendly people who lead comfortable lives in their large, plain, but well-furnished houses. A lot of pensioners spend their declining years there. The little town is justifiably known as La Ville des Millionnaires, because shortly before the war it could boast no fewer than 40 such. The Great War pulled the place out of its enchanted sleep and turned it into the focal point of enormous battles. Brisk new life went clattering over the cobbles and jangled the little windows, behind which anxious faces peeped out to try and see what on earth was going on. Strangers drank lovingly maintained cellars dry, jumped into mighty mahogany beds, and in their continual succession disturbed the contemplative ease of the people, who now stood huddled together on corners and in doorways of their unrecognizable little town, telling each other, not too loudly, horror stories about the occupation and the certain prospects for the ultimate victory of their own. The men lived in barracks, the officers were accommodated along the Rue des Lignées. During our time there, that street came to resemble a street of student digs. Wide-ranging conversations out of windows, bouts of nocturnal singing, and various scrapes and adventures were the things with which we largely concerned ourselves. Every morning we moved out to exercise on the large square by the subsequently renowned village of Fontaine. I had the sort of task that was congenial to me, as Colonel von Oppen had entrusted me with assembling and training a body of storm troops. I had plenty of volunteers for this body, but found I preferred to stick to the tried and tested associates from my various patrols and missions. And since this was a new unit, I devised the rules and training myself. My billet was most agreeable, my hosts, a kindly jeweller's couple by the name of Plancourt-Bourlon, rarely let me eat my lunch without sending up some delicacy or other. And in the evenings we often sat up over a cup of tea, played cards and chatted. The perennial question came up a lot, of course. Why does mankind have wars? In these hours together, Monsieur Plancourt often related tricks and pranks played upon one another by the idle and witty folk of Cambrai, who in peacetime had caused the streets and bars and markets to ring with laughter and reminded me of my dear Uncle Benjamin. For example, one particular joker had sent a letter to all the hunchbacks of the area, summoning them to appear before a certain notary over an important matter of an inheritance. Then, hiding behind a curtain in a house across the way at the hour in question with a few friends, he enjoyed the spectacle of 17 furious, rowdy goblins assailing the poor notary. There was another good story about an old spinster who lived opposite, who had a strange, long and skew neck. 20 years before, she had been known as a girl who was in a rush to get married. 6 young fellows presented themselves, and to each she gladly gave permission to speak to her father. The following Sunday, a substantial coach drew up with the 6 suitors inside, each one with a bouquet of flowers. In her alarm and confusion, the girl locked the door and hid herself, while the young fellows delighted the street with their larking about. Or this one day at the market, a notorious young man of Cambrai goes up to a farmer's wife and, pointing to a soft white cheese prettily sprinkled with herbs, asks her, "How much do you want for that cheese?" 20 sous, monsieur. He gives her the 20 sous. "So the cheese belongs to me now, is that right?" "Of course, monsieur. So I can do whatever I want with it."
Yeah,
Of
that's
course,
what happens when you buy cheese.
he throws the cheese in her face and leaves her standing there. On 25th July, we left our pleasant temporary home and travelled north to Flanders.
Asshole
We
kid.
read in the newspapers that an artillery battle had been raging there for weeks already, outdoing the Battle of the Somme, if not in intensity, then in range. In Steden, we detrained to the distant roar of cannon and marched through the unfamiliar landscape towards the camp at Ondank. Either side of the dead-straight military road were green, fertile, elevated beet fields and juicy pastures surrounded by hedges. Tidy farmhouses lay scattered about, with low overhanging thatched or tiled roofs, and bunches of tobacco hung on the walls to dry in the sun. The country people we passed were Flemish and spoke in that rough tongue that we almost thought we understood. We spent the afternoon in farm gardens, where the enemy aviators could not see us. Occasional ship's ordnance would fly over our heads with a gurgling sound we could hear from far off and hit nearby. One dived into one of the many little streams in the area and killed several men of the 91st, who happened to be bathing in it. As evening approached, I went up to the front line with an advanced detachment to prepare the relief. We passed through the forest of Harthulst and the village of Coiquet to the reserve battalion, and on the way were forced to break stride by a few heavy shells. In the dark, I could hear the voice of one recruit who was still unversed in our ways. That lieutenant never seems to take cover. "He knows what's what," he was told by a member of the storm troop. "If there's one on its way, then he's the first to lie down." We only took cover now when it was necessary, but then we didn't hang around. The degree of necessity is something that only an experienced man can determine, who can sense the course of the shell before the new soldier can hear the light fluttering of its approach. To hear better when things got hot, I would even exchange my steel helmet for a forage cap. Our guides, who didn't inspire complete confidence, advanced along endless box trenches. That's the term for passages that are not dug into the ground, because they would instantly fill with water, but are built up between lines of sandbags and fascines. After that, we brushed an amazingly disheveled-looking wood, out of which, our guides told us, a regimental staff had been pushed back a few days ago by the small matter of 1,000 10-inch shells. Such prodigality, I thought to myself. After traipsing this way and that through the thick brush, we were finally left standing completely lost and abandoned by our guides, on a rush-covered spot, surrounded by marshy pools of black water that gave back the moonlight. Shells plunged into the soft soil, sending up great sprays of mud that splattered down. At last, our unhappy guide, with whom we were now pretty incensed, came back, claiming to have remembered the way. Then he proceeded to lead us astray again, as far as a dressing station, over which, in short, regular intervals, shrapnels broke up, sending their balls and empty casings clattering through the bows. The doctor on duty provided us with a better guide, who escorted us to the Mauserburg, the headquarters of the reserve line. I straightway went on to the company of the 225th Regiment, which was to be relieved by our 2nd, and after a long search found a few houses in the cratered landscape
Here,
that
let
had
me
been
try with the other
extremely
one.
toughened on the inside with reinforced concrete. One of these had been smashed in the day before by a direct hit, and its inhabitants crushed, as in a mousetrap, by the collapsing roof plate. For the rest of the night, I squeezed into the overcrowded
Still there, princess?
box of the company commander, a decent grunt, who whiled away the time with his servant over a bottle of schnapps and a large tin of salt pork, stopping often to shake his head and listen.
Princess, still there? Do you want him on? So this other guy, Laffy, do you want him on the right or the left? Probably the right. I should probably try and... Could have planned this a little bit better. Here. Okay, that's I'm just checking some references.
Listened to the steadily increasing roar of the artillery. Then he would sigh for the good old days on the Russian front and curse the way his regiment had been pumped out. In the end, my eyes simply fell shut. My sleep was heavy and troubled. The high explosive shells falling all round the house in the impenetrable dark evoked extraordinary feelings of solitude and abandon in me. I pressed myself unconsciously against a man lying beside me on the pallet. Once I was startled awake by a powerful impact. We lit the walls to check if the house had been breached. It turned out to have been a small shell that had exploded against the outer wall. The following afternoon I spent with the battalion commander in the Mausberg. In rapid sequence, the 6-inch shells came down close to the command center, while the captain, his adjutant, and the orderly played unending rounds of scat and handed round a soda bottle full of rot gut. Sometimes he would put down his cards to attend to a messenger, or, with concerned expression, wonder about the safety of our concrete blockhouse against the bombardment. In spite of his loyal conviction to the contrary, we finally convinced him that it wouldn't stand up to a direct hit from above. In the evening, the shelling waxed to a demented fury. Ahead of us, colored flares went up in a continual stream. Dust-covered runners reported that the enemy was attacking. After weeks of drumming, the infantry battle was about to begin. We had come at the right time. I returned to company headquarters and waited for the company to arrive. They finally got in at 4 in the morning during a vehement shelling session. I took charge of my platoon.
Princess, over there, what do you think of this so far?
Place, a concrete construction disguised by the ruins of a demolished house in the middle of a huge cratered field of desperate horror. At 6 in the morning,
This one's
the dense
much harder.
fog lifted and permitted us to view our situation in its full hideousness. Straight away, a swarm of enemy aeroplanes flew in low over our heads, surveying the battered terrain and giving siren signals, while isolated infantrymen jumped for cover in shell holes. Half an hour later, the shelling commenced, washing over our little refuge like a typhoon. The forest of explosions gradually thickened into a solid, whirling wall. We squatted together, every second expecting the annihilating hit that would blow us and our concrete blocks away and leave our strong point level with the pitted desert all around. And so the day passed, with mighty outbursts of shelling and momentary quieter phases during which we sat and gritted our teeth. In the evening, an exhausted runner turned up and gave me an order from which I understood that the 1st, 3rd, and 4th companies would commence a counterattack at 10 to 11 in the morning, and the 2nd should wait to be relieved and then swarm into the front line. To gain strength for the hours ahead, I lay down, never guessing that my brother Fritz, whom I had supposed to be still in Hanover, was even now hurrying forward with a platoon from the 3rd Company through the firestorm close by our hut. I was long kept from sleep by the cries of a wounded man whom a couple of Saxons had brought in. They had lost their way and had fallen asleep, completely exhausted.
Well, Princess, it's been a couple hours. I'm gonna take a break.
Their comrade was dead.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Him to the nearest shell hole,
I'll
scooped a couple of
be back
shovels of earth over him, and
tomorrow to continue this. But I'm gonna back's hurting and I'm tired, so I'm gonna call it for now. But yeah, tomorrow we will continue Princess and Luffy. Come on. Say you silly thing. That's it for now. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.